In Civil War Women, North and South, we find a volume that compiles two distinct personal narratives. Cora Mitchell's recounts her early recollections of wartime upheaval and the family's perilous journey from Georgia to Rhode Island, while Charlotte Ravenel's journal documents the closing period of the war in the South, offering insight into civilian hardships, local sentiment, and the social landscape of a defeated region. Both narratives together reveal how women from differing backgrounds navigated loss, displacement, uncertainty, and societal transformation during and at the end of the Civil War. Now, who were these two women? Cora, writing about 1816 about her teenage experiences in 1861, was part of a Unionist family that lived in South Georgia. As tensions mounted, her family escaped Confederate territory to seek safety in Rhode Island. In her story, she recounts how her mother bravely orchestrated a journey through obstructed rivers and difficult terrain, with loyal caregivers ensuring the safety of younger siblings. Amid emotional farewells and fears, Cora insisted on accompanying her mother, revealing the intensity of familial bonds and the harsh realities of wartime flight. Charlotte, writing in 1865 during the final months of the Civil War, kept a journal that gives readers a first-hand glimpse of life in the Confederacy as the conflict drew to a close. These entries depict life in the Confederacy as collapse nears, marked by resource shortages, daily struggles, and the emotional uncertainty of defeat. The narrative promises an intimate portrait of civilian life amid crumbling Southern infrastructure and morale at the close of the Civil War. And now, let's listen to this LibriVox recording of Civil War Women, North and South.
Part 1 of Civil War Women, North and South. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Civil War Women, North and South by Cora Mitchell and Charlotte Ravenel. Part 1, Reminiscences of the Civil War, by Cora Mitchell. My father, Thomas Leeds Mitchell of Groton, Connecticut, was a cotton merchant at Apalachicola, Florida, a small but important city at the mouth of the Chattahoochee River. As there were few railroads, all the cotton raised in the interior was shipped down the river to be compressed and taken down the bay, where steamers and sailing vessels were waiting to carry it to England or the northern states. Father was one of the earliest settlers and held important positions of trust in city and church. His wife, Sophia Brownell, of Providence, Rhode Island, a woman of strong character, was well fitted to stand by his side and help him establish a home in an almost new country. The society of Apalachicola was unusually good. A number of northern families who had been drawn there, as my father had, and families from Virginia and other southern states, brought together elements of culture and refinement unusual in so small and primitive a town. Father, being a northerner by birth and training, was essentially northern in his sentiments. He did not believe in slavery. While he employed many Negroes, he owned only 3, and they had come to him imploring him to buy them, as otherwise they would be sold in the open market. They were faithful, valuable servants, and became real members of our family. One of them, Uncle Young, as we always called him, was sent as a representative to the state legislature after the war. But he never forgot the old times, and not long before Father died, he received a letter from him which began, "Dear Masked Tom." I well remember the excitement when war seemed imminent. Though only a very young girl, I was allowed to go to a mass meeting. I felt the thrill of it all, and though too young to enter into the merits of the question, was carried along by the general excitement and influence. Father was a good deal of a philosopher, and always looking on the bright side, and was convinced that the war could not be long, and peace would soon be restored. As he had large properties in the South as well as his business, he decided not to go north, for he well knew everything would be confiscated if he did. Our little city felt the shock of the first gun, fired on Fort Sumter, and almost immediately warlike preparations were started. Being on the coast, the town was supposed to be in danger. Companies were formed and drilled. Batteries of sandbags, armed with cannon, lined that part of the town exposed to invasion from the bay, and there was much coming and going. Ladies met to embroider banners, and the ceremonies of presentation seemed to me most glorious and exciting events. Companies of young soldiers came down from the interior, and to my childish mind it seemed as though our part of the country was to be the seat of war. This was in the spring of 1861. My oldest sister, Floride, was to be married early in the autumn, and Mother wanted to go north to see her father and get my sister's trousseau. It was a hurried and hazardous trip, and she returned with much difficulty, being almost the last let through the lines. We were indeed glad to have her return safely, bringing the precious outfit. I feel sure no one else could have accomplished it, but she was a woman of indomitable will and courage. My sister's marriage took place soon after, and as I was one of the bridesmaids, war and all its consequences were naught to me for a while. My next recollection was that Apalachicola was to be abandoned as an army post. The blockade had shut up the port. All the soldiers were sent to the interior, except a company of scouts, which was stationed about 20 miles away, near some dismal swamps, and used to keep an eye on the coast and report any unusual occurrence. Of course, business was at a standstill, and many moved up to Columbus, Georgia, and other towns on the river. My brother-in-law decided to go to Columbus, and I was sent too, in order that I might go to school. The steamboat was crowded, and as it was at the time of a great flood, there was much to see and remember. The banks of the river were entirely under water, and sometimes the river was a large and continuous lake. Only those who have traveled on one of the southern rivers can understand the romance and beauty of it all. The huge moss-draped trees, the landings at night, with the negro crew singing their weird songs while unloading by the light of pine knots burning in wire cages. The trip was none too long for my excited fancy. My life in Columbus has always been a happy recollection. I loved my school and teacher, and the thrilling and dreadful events that took place touched me very lightly. The next event of importance was that a brother 2 years older than I had been taken from the schoolhouse at Apalachicola by a detachment of soldiers and conscripted into the Southern Army. He was not allowed to go home, even for a change of clothing. He was below the age limit, which limit had been lengthened at both ends since the beginning of the war. My parents were greatly distressed, and besought the colonel to release him, but without avail, and he was hurried off to the camp. Fortunately, he had some friends in the company who gave him food and cared for him as well as they could. The colonel said he had no food for conscripts. Not many months after this, he came up to Columbus on a furlough, his health having broken down under poor food and the malarial air from the swamps. He was much changed from the rugged, healthy boy I had left behind in Apalachicola. We did all we could to repair damages in the short time allowed him, and were very sorry to have him leave us and go back to the privations of the camp. The war progressed, but being so far from the scene of conflict, I was affected mainly by the troubles of my friends who had members of their families in the active army. Occasionally a father or son would be home for a while, and often the news of friends being killed in battle would shock the community, so there was little rest or happiness. I remember a feast gotten up for some Southern soldiers going through Columbus to join the army, and enjoyed waiting on the table. Though food was scarce and costly, everyone gave of their best, and there was much cheering and enthusiasm. Quite a contrast to this was our going down to the station to see a load of prisoners being taken to Andersonville. I saw no food or drink given them. They were huddled as close together as was possible, and all I could do was to pity their forlorn condition. It seemed only one of the natural conditions of war. One day, coming home from school, I was met with the astounding news that my father had gone down to the blockading vessel in the harbor, taking my brother with him, and both were on their way north. The world seemed upside down for a while, and I was conscious that my eyes grew big with wonder and amazement. At last more tidings came, and we realized the whole situation. My brother had had a very severe relapse of the fever, and his life had been in much danger, but the kindness of his fellow soldiers and his strong constitution had pulled him through, and when able to be helped to his saddle, he was told he could have a few days' furlough to go to his family in Apalachicola. When he arrived after 2 days' riding and resting, he looked so very ill that it was evident he could not go back to camp, for the boy's life would be the penalty. Father's decision was quickly made. "How long can you stay here?" he asked. "2 nights." "We will see about that," was the answer. Father knew that it would never do to let him return, and the only alternative was to take him north by the way of the blockade. Everything had to be done with the utmost secrecy, for the lives of all concerned in the transaction were at stake. If any small detail miscarried, the consequences were fatal. The most difficult item was getting someone to row them down the bay. Once on board the blockade, they were safe unless the ship should be captured. Father was so loved and respected in the town that he was able to overcome even this difficulty, and 2 men promised to be ready at the wharf at a certain time. These men had been in the habit of going down for oysters and fish, so their movements were not noticed. They had been suspected of helping others off, but it could not be proved. The next day was devoted to preparations. The trunk was wrapped in many folds of bagging and taken down in a wheelbarrow after dark. Later on, my father and brother strolled down separately, each having nervous shocks. Father met an old friend just as he arrived at the wharf. As father had been ill for some time, Mr. Ormond was much surprised at seeing him out at that time, and asked why he was there. Father said, "Oh, yes, indeed, it is entirely too late. I must go home immediately," and walked back up the street, returning later, and reaching the boat unobserved. Colby, when halfway down, heard someone running behind him. He was too feeble to run, so turned to face his younger brother, bringing something that had been forgotten. They were finally off, and met with no other adventure during the 5 miles' ride. The next morning Mother stood at the back gate, and the man who had rowed them down the bay passed by. Neither appeared to greet the other, but he whispered, "All is well." That was a great relief, but she did not hear of their safe arrival in the north for several months. The captain of the blockader treated them very kindly, and sent them to Key West by the fortnightly transport, and from there they went north to our summer home in Rhode Island. Mother then had to face a very serious situation. Naturally, the people were much incensed over my brother's desertion, and no one could tell what the authorities might do. Left with 4 small children and another, myself, in Georgia, with very little money and food scarce, there were many perplexities to meet, both immediate and in the future. She knew that the only thing for her to do was to follow Father as soon as possible. But first she must get me down from Columbus, for she could not think of my being left behind. It would seem a simple thing for her to go up the river after me, but the war had brought about many unexpected conditions. Fearing the blockaders would go up the river and burn the towns and factories, the Confederates had obstructed the passage with trees, rafts, and other materials, which in time had accumulated still further debris of all sorts, so that the river was practically useless above this obstruction, which extended northward for miles. The problem was how to get around this obstruction. Beyond that, she could get a steamer. But the hardest trouble of all was leaving her little children behind. Dear old Aunt Anne, a faithful colored nurse, could be entirely trusted for service and devotion, and a relative promised to protect them. Though Mother was brave, it was a hard trial to leave the young family and start off alone on the unknown but certainly dangerous journey. She was rowed as far as the obstruction, around which she was carried in an ox cart, stopping for the night's rest whenever she could find a decent log house. She must have suffered many privations and much fatigue. Rowing against the current was slow and tedious work, and jolting over rough roads through the deep forest must have been lonely and fatiguing. Realizing that I could never endure such an experience, and hearing that the river had made a way for itself around the obstruction through a narrow, swift, and dangerous one, she resolved to brave it, and engaged a man to build a strong boat for the return trip, and take us down himself. He was an Italian who had lived in Apalachicola, and was a man to be trusted. Beyond the obstruction she found the rest of the journey easy, and she could rest a little before meeting us. That meeting was joyful, but full of conflicting emotions. She was so worn from the journey that she hesitated about taking me back with her, and said she would have to leave me behind after all. But I had something to say about that, and exclaimed vehemently, "Mother, if you do not take me with you, you will never see me again." So, after resting a couple of weeks, the eventful return journey was begun. I was sad at leaving my sister behind, but her husband and home were there, and as a family we had traveled so much, both on this continent and Europe, that we were used to partings, and I set out on this unusual journey without forebodings. The distance from Columbus to Apalachicola was about 300 miles. We took a steamboat to Fort Gaines, where there was a military station, and where we would have to get a passport, which we must present at a small station quite a distance below the obstruction. This was to stop, if possible, the constant escape of deserters. Immediately on our arrival at Fort Gaines, Mother went to the arsenal for the passport. She was met by a very agreeable young adjutant, who said he had not the power to give us one, but he was expecting the Major back at any moment, and he would give it. The next day she went out again, only to have the same experience. The third day, with the same result. On the fourth day I said, "Let me go. Perhaps he will give it to me." Taking an attendant, I trudged along the 2 miles with great confidence, and was rewarded by being able to bring the promise of the precious document. My youth probably appealed to the young man, and he could not help feeling that I ought not to be detained. We did not know it then, but found out afterwards that he had orders to detain us till the Major came, as we were not to be allowed to go on. He said for us to make our arrangements for departure the next day, and he would bring the passport himself to the steamboat, which would take us down to the obstruction. I was triumphant, but Mother had her doubts as to his keeping his word. The next morning we went on board, hoping for the best. The bell rang for starting, but still no adjutant appeared. At last, just when our hearts were sinking with disappointment and the gangplank was being drawn in, he came galloping down the road with the passport in his hand. He probably had hoped the Major would come at the last moment and relieve him of the responsibility. I never heard if he suffered from his disobedience of orders, but have always been grateful to him for his kindness. I still have the paper, and treasure it very highly. The distance to the obstruction was not great, and there we found Bernardo waiting for us with the new strong boat. My trunk and a few packages of food comprised the cargo, for we had to travel as light as possible. The other boatman, whom Bernardo had engaged, turned out to be a refugee like ourselves, and he was glad to give his services under the circumstances. The river had utilized one of those bayous, with which the southern rivers are so well provided, as a means of escape around the obstruction. It had been widened and deepened by the force of the strong current, but as the stream carried off the banks, the trees would fall in, making it much more dangerous, and the utmost care and skill were necessary to bring us through in safety. Mother and I lay in the bottom of the boat with strict orders not to move, while the little boat was tossed about by the swift current. If we had hit one of the projecting trees, we would have sunk immediately. Mother thought of her 4 helpless little children left in Apalachicola, and must have made many and earnest appeals for help and protection. I do not remember how long this lasted, but our progress was very swift, and finally the tension was relaxed, and we glided out into the smooth waters of the river. How lovely it looked after the mad turmoil and anxiety of the bayou! The men rested a while, letting the boat float down the peaceful river, and we all gave thanks for our deliverance from the dangers we had encountered. About 11 o'clock that night we found a good landing, where we went ashore, and lighting a fire to keep the wild beasts away, we lay down on the ground for a little rest from our cramped positions. Mother, worn out by the anxieties of the day, dozed off, but I was too excited by the novelty and beauty of the scene. The moon was full, and though just before Christmas, the weather was mild. The air was heavy with the scents of the forest behind us, from which could be heard from time to time the calls of owls, panthers, and wildcats. We saw none, but there was always the expectation that one would appear. We roasted peanuts in the coals, and toasted bacon and corn pones. These were our only food during the entire journey. The river water, muddy though it was, satisfied our thirst. Supplies of all kinds had long been very scarce, and we had learned to be very thankful for little, and that of the simplest. About 4 in the morning we resumed our way down the now placidly flowing stream. The banks were sometimes high bluffs, then low stretches of sand or clay, but more often tangled masses of trees and thick undergrowth coming right down to the water. No one could possibly penetrate it, and we were as alone as though we were the only inhabitants of the earth. The exciting event of the morning was passing the little military post where the passport must be examined. I can well remember the rather overdone indifference of my mother, and the stoical look on the faces of the men. The passport was only for Mother and me. It said nothing about the men, and at first it seemed as though there would be some trouble. But it was so obvious that we must have some one to do the rowing that we were given permission to go on. But it was not till we had left the post several miles behind that we were really at ease. The rest of the trip was uneventful. The men rowed and rested. We always made progress, as the flow of the river was several miles an hour. We hoped to reach home before dark of the second day in the little boat, but the men were nearly exhausted and could not row steadily. Finally we came out into the big bay in front of the city, and oh, how little and frail our boat seemed, especially as it had begun to leak, and Mother and I had to take turns bailing. But all things come to an end at last, and about midnight we climbed up on the deserted wharf of unfortunate Apalachicola. Little did it look like the busy, thriving place of 2 years before. Instead of high piles of cotton bales, grass was growing in the streets. Where innumerable negroes used to work busily, there was silence and loneliness. The life of the city was gone. Poor Apalachicola! Her glories had departed. The scene made a vivid impression on my youthful imagination, and I realized in a degree how sad and forlorn it was. We were glad to be on our feet after the confinement of the boat. No one knew when we would arrive, all were asleep, and the walk to our home seemed like going through a dead city. It reminded me of the old story of the Sleeping Beauty. However, the faithful nurse slept with one eye open, and we were soon surrounded by the little family. The meeting was almost too pathetic for joy, and tears and laughter were about evenly distributed. It was certainly an unusual scene. Aunt Ann, the old nurse, as well as the children, had rushed out in their nightclothes, and we embraced each other in the garden among the orange trees, regardless of the neighbors. The excitement stimulated us for the moment, but we were so exhausted that we were soon put to bed. It was fortunate that we arrived as we did, for the food question had grown to be a very serious one for the old negro, as the simple supply was nearly exhausted. Agriculturally, Apalachicola was unfortunately situated, being built on a sandbank. Almost everyone who could get away had gone, and there were few negroes to cultivate what little soil there was. No steamers could come down the river, and if anyone went down the bay for fish and oysters, he was suspected of sympathizing with the Northerners. That left the city dependent on an occasional barge coming down the lower part of the river with cornmeal. Of other food there was none, except a few sweet potatoes. There were no cattle, consequently no meat; no poultry, as there was no food for them. Our cow had died from lack of food. She had lived quite a while on cottonseed, but gave very little milk, and at last was buried in the backyard. Before Father left, he had found several casks of rice in one of his empty warehouses. It was taken to the house, and he thought it would last a long time. But one day Mother discovered that weevils were in it, and put it out in the yard on sheets. The neighbors saw it, and soon a crowd collected and demanded the rice. Mother knew they would take it by force if she refused, so yielded, giving each a little till nearly all was gone. After the supply of rice was exhausted, there was little good food to be had. Cornmeal, with an occasional treat of oysters, was the steady bill of fare. Once the supply of meal was so low that Mother went to a friend, saying, "I hear you have some cornmeal. You must divide with me. I have almost nothing for my children." Once there was a report that a barge was in sight, and all flocked to the wharf, only to see the barge upset and the whole cargo dumped into the water. One can imagine the scene. I had fared rather better in the interior, and found the food very unpalatable, but hunger is the best of sauces, and I soon found an appetite for the simple fare. As soon as Mother had rested, she began to plan for our going north. She knew we would have to wait till spring, as none of us was prepared to face the rigors of a northern winter. She sent a note to the captain of the Somerset, which he acknowledged by calling one day when he came up to burn a few houses. He said that when she was ready he would come up for us and take care of us till the transport came from Key West, so her anxieties on that score were at rest. One day we heard that the town was excited about two men who had been missing for some time, and that a search party had started out in quest of them. Mother was much worried, as they were the men who had taken Father and Colby down the bay. Later, one of the scouts who came regularly to town said if the men were wanted, they could be found at a certain place. Both had been dead some time. They had been tied to trees and shot at by the whole company. They had been suspected of helping others besides Father, and of certain other acts that brought them under suspicion of disaffection. All this was a great shock to us. I remember the day that the wife of one of them came to Mother and asked her if she had ever told who took Father off. Mother's feelings can well be imagined, but she could answer with a clear conscience that she never had. Towards March, the captain sent a letter saying he had received orders not to take any more refugees, as there had been so many, and they always came so poor, and many of them were ill from exposure. The government was tired of supporting them, consequently he would be unable to give us the required assistance. This sounded very discouraging, but Mother's determination was not at all shaken. She knew we could not stay in Apalachicola and starve. There were some islands in the bay on which were a few old houses, and she felt sure she could find shelter there till the fortnightly transport came, so she began her preparations. She packed the articles she felt she must have, if possible, and everything was arranged for leaving at a moment's notice. Not long after, word was brought that the launches were coming up the bay. Mother immediately started for the wharf and met the captain, saying, "I am now ready to go back with you." He laughed and said, "Well, make your packages small." The result was that she, with her 5 children and 15 pieces of luggage, were put safely on board the launches, and we bid farewell to our southern home. The people turned out to see us off, and the presence of the various officers, to say nothing of several small cannon, sufficed to ensure us a respectful treatment. On the way, Mother explained her plan to the captain, but he scorned it, saying, "I will take you over the island after lunch, and you can see for yourself, but I could not think of letting you stay there. I shall be very happy to have you as my guests." It was a new and wonderful experience for us youngsters, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. I must say here that the Somerset was a reconstructed ferry boat that previously had plied between New York and Brooklyn. This ferry boat, returned to her original condition, is still carrying passengers to and fro between the same cities at Fulton Ferry, and whenever I chance to cross on her I am overwhelmed with recollections, most of them very pleasant. Lunch was served as soon as we arrived, and words cannot express our joy at seeing white bread and butter, apples and cake, besides other luxuries, spread out before us. It seemed almost like sacrilege to eat such precious delicacies. The captain enjoyed our delight, and mother shed tears at seeing her children eat all they wanted. It is almost impossible to describe how happy we were the next 2 weeks. The ship and everyone on board were at our disposal. The ship's tailor made beautiful suits for the 3 boys, and lamented that he could not do the same for the rest of us. We were a shabby-looking lot, as to clothing, for nothing had been bought for 2 years, and growing children are not very careful. Some brown linen curtain had been found in one of Father's stores, and made into shirts for the boys and dresses for the girls. Shoes had been made out of stiff pieces of cloth, etc. It is useless to enter into these little details, for there would be no end to my story, and they are not essential. The captain sent the boys to the mess room, and the rest of us lived in his dining room. We were sent ashore each day for exercise and play, were allowed to bring shells and other treasures on board, and were petted and feasted and very, very happy. In fact, nothing was too good for us. The truth was that these men had been shut off from family life so long, many of them having children at home, that they were as happy as we, and it was a pleasant break in their monotonous routine. One day the captain said to Mother, "I know that whatever Confederate money you have is worthless, and you cannot possibly have any greenbacks, so you must be without funds, and how will you get this family to Rhode Island?" She replied with much spirit, "It is my own affair how much or how little I have. I expect my husband has sent some money to Key West for my use." "Very well," said he, "I have $10,000 here, prize money, that I want deposited in New York, and it would be a favor to me if you would carry it with you, using as much as you need, and your husband can replace it at his convenience." "Oh," said Mother, "I have all the responsibility I can bear now. I could not possibly take your money." "Have you $100?" asked the captain. "No." "Have you 50?" Such persistence brought the climax. "I'll tell you just how much I have. 12 gold dollars that belong to Cora." "I thought as much," said he. "Now, I insist upon your taking $500, for you will need a good deal as soon as you leave us." Such kindness could not be resisted, and was accepted with much gratitude. The days flew by very swiftly. Once a vessel was seen trying to run the blockade, and though we went after her with all haste, she made her escape. Another day we went ashore to see the men casting a seine. Quite large fish were caught, and made good sport for the fishermen. Every time we went ashore, we were carried on the backs of the sailors, as the water was too shallow to permit even the small boats to land. We enjoyed it all so much that if we had not had home in view, we should have been very sorry when we saw the Honduras arrive, and knew that the time had come for us to leave our kind friends. The Somerset family was sincerely sorry to lose us, for our stay had been mutually pleasant. However, the Honduras proved to be as happy a home as the Somerset, and our life on board for 4 days has always been a pleasant recollection. We stopped at Tampa and Cedar Keys, both very beautiful harbors, and distributed rations, mail, ammunition, and other necessities at the blockading points. It was very interesting to watch. When we arrived in Key West, another problem presented itself. The town was full of refugees. The one hotel was crowded to its fullest capacity, and no boat from New Orleans in sight. It was after Butler had taken New Orleans, and a regular line of steamers plied between that city and New York. Yellow fever had broken out in Key West, and the expected steamer might not even come to the wharf. Several of the officers of the Honduras said they knew of a place which was respectable, but they could not say more for it. But if Mother would go there, they too would live there till they had to leave for a return trip. Their presence added greatly to our comfort and safety. While in Key West, we were made happy by a visit from our old slave and cook, Aunt Sally. She was a Virginia darky and a first-class servant. Before Mother had gone to Columbus for me, the negroes had begun to leave for Key West in large groups. Aunt Sally came to Mother and said she wanted to go, and Mother made no opposition. In fact, she was glad to have her go, as it made one less to feed. She knew Aunt Sally would always be able to take care of herself, as she was an accomplished laundress. I remember well when she first came to us. She was to be sold, and being such a fine woman, was allowed time to find her own master. Failing that, she would be sold to the highest bidder in the open market. She went down on her knees before my father, imploring him to buy her as an act of charity. She was overcome with joy when he consented, for she knew she would be kindly treated. I used to stand beside her in the evening when she was making bread. She would entertain me by telling interesting stories and singing the old plantation songs, only one of which I remember, and only 3 verses of that. The music is a quaint minor, and I always loved it. Reader's note. Here are 3 staves of music. End of reader's note. If it hadn't been for Adam and Eve, there never would have been no sin. But Adam and Eve am dead and gone, and we have the debt for to pay. Shout, chillens, to ease my troubled mind. The corn in the field is a ripening, and the laborers they are but a few. How can you stand so idle there, when there's so much work for to do? Shout, chillens, to ease my troubled mind. Way down into the valley, way down into the valley, I see my Lord a-comin' for to ease my troubled mind. Shout, chillens, to ease my troubled mind. I have often tried to find this song among collections of Negro melodies, but have never been successful. Aunt Sally heard we were in Key West, and immediately came to see us, and took us children in her motherly arms. After 10 days there was a rumor that the steamer from New Orleans was in sight, and Mother flew to the dock full of resolution and hope. When the captain saw her, he said very decidedly, "Madam, I have no room. Everything is as full as possible." "But my daughter and I can sleep on the cabin floor." "Oh," said he, "if you have a daughter, then it is absolutely impossible." "Captain," she replied, "I have 5 children, and we are all going with you." The thought that that was the last steamer for the summer, and yellow fever surely carrying us off if we stayed, gave force to her manner. The captain wilted, and said meekly, "Well, I have one stateroom, dark as night all the time, and flooded each morning when the decks are washed." "I will take it, whatever it is. When do you leave?" "Get your children immediately, for we leave as soon as possible. Any moment." How her heart must have jumped for joy when we sailed away from the fever-stricken city into the pure air of the Gulf, and knew we were headed toward home. The fever raged in full force that summer, and many, especially negroes, died. As we never heard from Aunt Sally, we felt sure she was one of the victims. This part of our journey was very different from our previous experiences. We were no longer honored and feasted. We were only one group among many forlorn refugees. We were shabby and neglected. Part of the time we were seasick, and always uncomfortable in our cramped quarters. The boys looked neat in their sailor suits, but the rest of us were, to say the least, not dressed in the latest fashion. The first day my brother Tom was wandering alone about the saloon, when an officer ordered him to go forward, saying, "No sailors were allowed aft." It took a good deal of explanation before he was satisfied that the boy was a passenger, for the suit was so exactly right that he could hardly be convinced that it belonged to a landsman. That was before it was the fashion for boys to wear sailor suits. The rest of my story is not very thrilling. We arrived at our home in Rhode Island after an uneventful trip to New York, and were welcomed by my father and brother, who had passed a long and lonely winter. The old farm seemed a haven of rest and plenty after our hard experience in Apalachicola. Several of our kind naval friends have visited us since then, and we were very happy at being able to offer hospitality to those who had befriended us in time of peril and need.
Before we begin Charlotte's story, take a moment to consider what emotions does Cora convey as she faces the prospect of being separated from her family during this tumultuous time? And secondly, how does her mother's determination reflect the broader challenges faced during the Civil War?
Part 2 of Civil War Women, North and South by Cora Mitchell and Charlotte Ravenel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, Journal Letter kept by Miss Charlotte St. Julienne Ravenel of Pushy Plantation for Miss Meta Hayward. Pushy, February 1865. My dear Meta, as we are cut off from each other now, I will attempt to write for you, in journal form, an account of the trying times through which we are passing. After the evacuation of Savannah, we were very anxious to get to Aiken, but Pa thought it best not to go until we were certain of Sherman's movements. We heard from time to time that Charleston could not be held, and yet we heard on every side that Augusta was his destination. Several events occurred which would have prevented our going up if it had been our intention. The freshet, then, too, Henry's illness, and last of all, the cutting of the railroad which effectually cut us off. We got newspaper accounts of Sherman's movements on Orangeburg, and then there was a report that he was marching down the State road to Charleston, and of course we believed it. Every day report brought them nearer. Henny had the silver packed, ready for interment. On Wednesday evening, the 10th of February, a note came from Aunt Ria, saying the Yankees were not far from Walworth, that they had burnt 2 houses on the river, and that all the men and boys in the upper parish were leaving home and going to a place of safety. This made us very uneasy on Harry's account, for he was very weak. That night we got a note from Pa, who was staying in Indianfield, asking Henny to send for them very early the next morning. He said Uncle Rene's horses would be used for something else, as there was no time to be lost, and telling her to have the silver ready. We thought the note very mysterious, but were not at all alarmed by it, for on the 16th, the next day, Grandpa sent off for salt, and sent one of the servants to town for some things we needed. After breakfast I was quietly reading The Queens of England, when we heard a horse racing up the avenue. Cousin Henrietta had sent word to say that the Yankees were at Moorfield, and asked 2 of us, for pity's sake, to go and stay with her. You can never imagine our feelings when we heard it, and thought of Aunt Ria by herself. My first impulse was to burn my letters, and to put on a suit of good clothes, in case the others should be taken. By that time the carriage came from Indianfield, and Pa came in. He was in such a hurry that he never said good morning, but told us to come and help him pack. He then went in and told Harry that he must go right off. Fright seemed to make us all strong, for 2 of us nearly ran with Harry's trunk down one flight of stairs and up another. Pa and Harry went off in the carriage, loaded with all kinds of things, and Uncle Rene went on horseback. Though it was a relief to get them off, it was a very sad parting, for we did not know when we would meet again, and the excitement in Harry's weak state made him so nervous we were very uneasy about him. Soon after they got off, we remembered the wine upstairs, and though we did not know at what moment the Yankees would be here, we made the attempt to bring it down, and then we had time to seal the bottles and have them buried in the garden. By that time a wagon came from Moorfield with some of Aunt Ria's things. We were very much relieved to hear that the enemy was not at Moorfield, but near Walworth. A carriage then came from Indianfield, and you would have been amused to see the number of people in it, 4 nurses and 8 children. The house was in confusion all day. Belle and Aunt Ria both moving over, and Grandpa moving provisions into the house. We all worked so hard that we were completely worn out by night. Aunt Ria came that evening and told us how the mistake had been made. She had written to Saracens exactly what she wrote us the evening before. The family there sent word to the driver at Brunswick that the Yankees were near Moorfield, and he must give out the corn to the negroes. The driver sent word to Northampton that they were at Moorfield. As everything was so quiet, Emily and I went to spend the night with Cousin Henrietta. We had not been frightened enough for one day, for after supper Mr. Jervey's entire family came down. They had heard that the raiders had burnt Mr. Parker's house near them. They had intended coming down the next day, but this news brought them at once. Emily had gone to bed with a headache, and wanted to get up and come home, but I persuaded her they could not get there before the next day, though I was so frightened I could scarcely stand. So much for one day of Yankee fright. February 17. We were quite relieved to hear that the enemy had taken the State Road and gone down to Somerville. They had visited several places and taken what they pleased. On our way home we met Belle and Sister, who told us of a report that the Yankees were at the Rocks Church and the plantation on their way to Belle Isle. I did not believe it, but thought it better to be prepared, so buried a few things. Aunt Ria received a note from Cousin Edward saying there was no truth in the reports we had heard, that there was not a Yankee this side of Orangeburg. We were not left quiet for long, for that evening Captain Gerard, from Savannah, rode up to say that he had come to notify the planters that all of their corn was to be impressed by our government to feed the army on its retreat from Charleston, and that planters would be obliged to remove their property beyond the lines. This was the first intimation we had that the evacuation had commenced. We then held a council of war, and decided that we must send and let the gentlemen know what we had heard. Fortunately, we had found out that they were at the Edys. We all felt very blue, for we heard that our army was crossing as fast as possible at St. Stephen's, and then the bridge was to be burned. February 18. By breakfast time, the hiding party arrived. At first, Pa said it was impossible to stay here, that we must leave if we had to walk, but upon deliberation he concluded we could not go, for the railroad being cut, our only way was by Orangeburg, which we knew had been in the hands of the enemy, and besides, we did not know if we had a house to go to, for we had heard nothing definite from Aiken. We had 3 of our soldiers to spend the night, and they cheered us up a great deal, and said it was best to stay at home. February 19th. I have never spent such a Sunday, and I hope I never will spend such another. We were in confusion from the time we got up until we went to bed. Aunt Bet moved over, and Mr. Gilliatt came with her to spend a few hours. I had just been hoping that some of the soldiers we knew would stop here. That night, after we had all retired, Tom Hayward came up, his feet all blistered from marching. On the 20th, Tom Hayward, Tom Porcher Ravenel, and Samuel Ravenel all left to join their respective commands, Tom Porcher having joined Mr. Gayonet's battery. We were very anxious that Harry should go along with them, but he was by no means strong enough. Nothing occurred of any occurrence except our soldiers coming in continually until the 24th, when we heard that there was fighting down at Biggin Church. Uncle Thomas, who was at home, hurried off, and Belle moved her family to Pineville to secure a summer home. About dinner time a party of horsemen rode up. For a time we thought them Yankees, but soon found out that they were a squad under Lieutenant Miller from Colcott's cavalry. On the 25th, just at dinner time, Dr. Waring drove up to say that Uncle Thomas would pass through in a few moments on his way to St. Stephen's, and that our pickets were retreating before the enemy. In a very short time a number of our men passed through the yard. We felt as if our last friends had left us, and that we would never see a Confederate soldier again. And to add to our discomfort, Dr. Waring told us that the Yankees had visited Gippy, taken all they wished, and then given out everything else to the negroes. Cousin Catherine's clothes were thrown out, her bedclothes, towels, and so forth burnt. Her person was guarded, that was all. Of course, this put us in a state of mind. That night Penny and myself sat up until 2 o'clock, putting away things in a mattress. We opened the cotton and put the things between. Though the next day was Sunday, we found a hiding place in our room and put away a great many things. That evening we heard that Mr. Harvey had been visited, but not very badly treated. Just as we had gone upstairs, a servant of Uncle Rene's came in to say that the Yankees were all along the road from Fair Spring to Wanttoot. We all slept in our clothes that night, for we were certain they would be here before morning. On the 27th, about midday, the alarm was given that the Yankees were coming, but we had our fright for nothing, for they turned out to be some of our scouts under Lieutenant Bright. They had 4 prisoners taken near Mr. Westcott's place with a cart full of things. 2 of our men said they wanted to kill the prisoners, but the others would not let them. They stayed that night and the next at Harbin, or a part of the next, for a servant betrayed, and they were taken so much by surprise that 2 of these men were killed, 2 wounded, and Bright and 2 of his men taken prisoners. The Yankees fired several times into the house, thinking men were there. They then gave out everything to the negroes, which they all brought back to Cousin Jane. The 1st of March is a day which we will never forget. Everything went on as usual until 9 o'clock at night, when we heard several pistol shots in the negro yard. I ran upstairs to tell Penny, who had gone to bed, and by the time I got back we heard a noise at the back door. Our hearts sank when we heard them talking, for they were negroes without an officer, what we had always dreaded. They asked for the master of the house, and when Grandpa went out, they asked in the most insolent manner for his horses, wagons, meat, and poultry. They then asked if there were any firearms in the house, and told there was none but a plantation gun. They said they would not believe that such a house could be without a gun, and that they would have it or shed blood. They then went off into the yard to get the things. They emptied the smoke house, took what poultry they wanted, and then went to the storeroom under the house, took a few things from there, and told the negroes to go in and take the rest, which they did, cleaning out the storeroom and meat room. There were a great many things there, for Aunt Bet had moved over her provisions. The plantation negroes took about 20 bushels of salt, 20 of rice, 15 of grist, besides several jars of lard, molasses, all of Henny's soap, a box of Pineland crockery, and a good many other things. They left us with 1 quart of salt in the house, and would not bring any of it back until Pa stated the case to a white Yankee the next day, and he went around and made them bring some of it back. When the negro soldiers first went to the storeroom, they sent for Grandpa. It made our blood curdle to hear our aged relative spoken to in the manner they did. We were all in the hall, and could hear everything that went on below. After some very impudent language, we heard a gun click. I will never forget that moment as long as I live. The wretch had his gun pointed at Grandpa, and though we found out afterwards that they did not dare to take life, we did not know it at the time. After this, they called up the negroes and told them they were free, and if they worked for Grandpa again, they would shoot them. They then went off with 3 horses, a wagon, and a buggy. They told the negroes that the army would be through the next day to take our clothes and other things. 3 of us sat up in the hall for the rest of the night, and though the others retired to their rooms, there was rest for no one. It must have been too mortifying to poor Grandpa for his negroes to behave as they did, taking the bread out of our mouths. I thought better of them than that. I have attempted to describe that dreadful night, but nothing can come up to the reality. The next morning everything looked so desolate that it made us feel sad. Most of the house servants came in crying, and said they were willing to do for us, but were afraid. Of course, we would not put them in any danger, so sent them all off. We sat down to breakfast to a plate of hominy and cold cornbread that had been cooked the day before for one of our soldiers. The very night before we had sat down to an elaborate supper. Such are the fortunes of war. We cleaned up the house and cooked dinner, looking all the time for our friends, for such we considered the officers. Just as our dinner was put on the table, a party rode up. We were so glad to see them that we all went in the piazza. The officer came forward and bowed very politely. Pa then told him how we had been treated the night before, and asked what guarantee we would have against such treatment in the future. Captain Hulbert, who was in command of the party, said that the black soldiers had no authority to come without an officer, and if found they would be punished. He said that General Potter would be along soon, and we might get a protection from him, but afterwards he said that he would write a paper which might do us good, and certainly would do no harm. I do not remember the words, but the sense of it was that we had very wisely remained at home, while many had flocked to other parts of the Confederacy. He said that everything had already been taken from us, and he would advise that we would not be further molested. He then spoke to the negroes, told them they were free, and could either go away or stay at home. But if they remained on the place, they must work, for no one could live without working. He told them they would be better off if they stayed at home. Soon after Colonel Hartwell and staff arrived. They all agreed in saying that the marauders would be punished, and the colonel signed the paper. One of his staff got quite familiar, played with Aunt Ria's baby, little Maria, and ended by kissing her. We laugh and tell the baby she has caught a Yankee beau, and she always laughs and seems to enjoy the joke. In a very short time General Potter and his staff came up in the piazza. Then the army commenced passing through the yard, about 3 regiments of infantry, 1 white and 2 colored, passing through, besides artillery and cavalry. Each one stopped, and the men ran in every direction after poultry. They marched the colored regiments right by the piazza, I suppose as an insult to us. The negroes were collected in the yard and cheered them on. Henny and the sister asked the general if he could not leave us a guard that night, but he said there was no use. His army did not straggle, and that he could not leave a guard at every place he passed. The general did not make a favorable impression on us. He was very short in his manner, but his staff were very polite. One of them told us to try the general again. You must not be too surprised at our staying out in the piazza with so many men, for there were a great many of us to keep company, and then we had never seen such a sight in our lives before. The last of the army had not left the yard before we saw the general returning. He said he had determined to take up his headquarters here that night. We were all, of course, delighted, for we could not have been better guarded. They had the parlor for their sitting room, and 1 chamber for the general. The wagon train camped just in front of the house, and 2 regiments in the field in front. There was a sentinel at the front and 1 at the back door all night. The campfires looked very pretty at night. Did we ever imagine that Pooshee would be headquarters for a Yankee army? About 200 head of poultry and a great many sheep were killed. The negroes' own did not escape. We recognized one of the prisoners that our scouts had here the first of the week, driving a cart, and Lieutenant Bright and his men were prisoners that night in the washroom. One of them asked to be allowed to speak to some of the girls who were at the back door. He seemed to be a gentleman. During the course of the next day, soldiers were continually passing through. Our protection paper was of great use, for we were not molested again, and from that day to this 9th of March we have been in comparative quiet. Wentooth House has been burned, also 7 unoccupied houses in Pineville. Some of the residents there were shamefully treated, even their clothes taken from them. Uncle Rennie was among the fortunate ones. He only had a ham stolen from his house, but all of his poultry. They went into the house at Woodbow, though a Mrs. Williams was living there to protect it, opened every drawer and box in the house, dressed themselves in Uncle Thomas's and the boys' new clothes, leaving their old ones behind. At Northampton they were told by the negroes that a good many things were hid in the house, so made a thorough search. They actually threatened to hang Mr. Jervey, and had the rope brought. For some time they had been told that treasure had been buried. The people about here would not have suffered near as much if it had not been for these negroes. In every case they have told where things have been hidden, and they did most of the stealing. The negroes here have behaved worse, than any I have heard of yet. Daddy Sandy is as faithful as ever. He is sorry that the Yankees have been here. George still comes about the house, but does not do much. Daddy Billy, who we all thought so much of, has not come in since they were made free. He pretends to be hurt, because Henny told him he could go if he wanted to. Henny's maid, Annette, has taken herself off. Kate comes in regularly to attend in the bedrooms at night and morning. We have to do our own cooking now, and we don't know how nicely we do it. We take it by turns to cook dinner in the pantry, two going together every day. I have not touched my needle for a week. Would you believe that? The field negroes are in a dreadful state. They will not work, but either roam the country or sit in their houses. At first they all said they were going, but have changed their minds now. Pa has a plan to propose to them, by which they are to pay Grandpa so much for the hire of the land and houses, but they will not come up to hear it. I do not see how we are to live in this country without any rule or regulation. We are afraid now to walk outside of the gate. We have just heard a report that Charlie Porcher has been taken prisoner in a fight near Aiken, and fear it is true. Do let me tell you a smart trick of Cephas, Grandpa's carpenter. It is worthy of the Yankees. Before the minds of the Moorfield negroes had been poisoned, he went there and told the servant Robert that Aunt Ria had sent him for a cart, 5 turkeys, and a sheep. He then came here at night, took up his wife Adela, and traveled off to Charleston. One of Aunt Ria's negroes, who had always been sick, got 1 mule from Moorfield, another mule and carriage from some other place, went to Pinopolis, and took all of Mr. Stevens' books. The next day he went for the piano. He told some of the negroes that he had been playing on it already. The negroes are in the most lawless and demoralized state imaginable. If this is what the Yankees intended, they have made their work complete. We have to keep everything under lock and key, and can call nothing our own now. Grandpa seems completely broken down, though he tries to keep up. It must be hard for one of his age to have everything so changed from what he has been accustomed to all of his life. The day that the Yankees left here, George brought in an envelope which he found in the prison, the wash-house. It was directed to Miss Carrie Cribbs, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. On the back was a Confederate stamp, and inside a blank sheet of paper folded. At first we did not think anything of it, but the idea soon struck Aunt Bet that it was left here with an object, which was that we should write and let the young lady know what had become of him. We heard afterwards that one of the prisoners' name was Cribbs, so that settled all doubts we had on the subject. We will send the letter off the first opportunity we hear of, though I can't say when that will be, for we are entirely cut off from the world, and almost entirely from neighborhood news. March 10. We received notes from Whitehall and Saracens, and also a letter from Alice Palmer, quite a treat. The Whitehall negroes behaved shamefully. They rushed into the house, tore down the curtains, carried off bedding, blankets, and trunks, and are grumbling now that they have not enough. We hear that one man asked Cousin Mary Ann to step out and take a dance, that they were on equality now. March 11. Uncle Rennie dined here today. It was really refreshing to see someone out of the house. He says there is a report that Sherman has been defeated with heavy loss, and is going down to Georgetown. I fear it is too good to be true. Uncle Rennie also brought the news that fighting was going on at Blue Hole, Uncle Charles Snowden's place. I suppose it can only be a skirmish. How composedly we can be talking of fighting in our very midst. One item of news which I must not forget to tell you is that Newport has taken the cooking, and we are all ladies again. March 13. Dr. Waring came in today and told us the particulars of the affair at Blue Hole. On Thursday 4 Yankee negroes, with a good many plantation negroes, armed, went to Moorfield. There they found a quantity of wine. A good many men joined them from there and Cedar Grove, mounted on anything they could find, and in a drunken state they all rode up the parish. When they reached Blue Hole, Charlie Snowden, who was there on a visit, went off and informed our scouts. They killed 2 or 3 of the negroes and took several prisoners, which I do not think they kept long. After they left, the negro soldiers made the negroes move everything out of the house, and the family had to go into the kitchen. The next day our scouts came up again to assist Aunt Harry in recovering her things, but she begged them to go away, that they had been the cause of her trouble, so they left in not at all a good humor, and we all heard nothing more. I hope young Charlie Snowden has succeeded in getting out of the way. Several of the people about here have put up the white flag, because the Yankees told them it would be a sign that they had already been visited. Our scouts did not like it. They said it looked as if the country had submitted, so they have all been taken down. I am so glad we never had one up. March 14. We all went to Northampton this morning to pay a visit, quite an era in our own monotonous lives. Pa rode on horseback, and we closed up the ranks on foot. March 15th. Aunt Ria left us this morning to stay a while at Woodlawn. She went in the buggy with the baby and Mom Mary. The 2 boys followed in the cart. March 16th. Dr. White dined here today. He had just crossed the river. He had not seen a paper for some time, so of course could not tell us much news. Sherman had not been defeated, and was avoiding a battle. March 17th. Doctors White and Waring paid visits here today. We are not as much cut off as we expected at first. Dr. Waring told us he heard that the oath of allegiance was to be offered to every man in the country. This is the worst news we have heard of for some time. Pa and Harry will try and get out of the way, but Grandpa will be compelled to take it. March 18th. Mr. Kane and Anna Maria were here today. The old gentleman seems to feel his loss very much. March 20th. This morning Pa went to Woodlawn to try and make arrangements for carrying us all to Aiken. He has succeeded in hiring 3 mules, and the present plan is that we are to start on Wednesday in a wagon. Rather a novel style of making the trip. We are all anxious now to go, but hate so much leaving Grandpa and the rest of the family, particularly in Grandpa's state of health. March 21st. We heard rumors today of the enemy landing on the banks of the Santee and coming this way in great force, which made Pa decide not to go on Wednesday. March 22nd. We heard today from Nina and Cousin James Wilson. Nina writes on the 16th of March from Winesboro. She had met the enemy there and had not lost much. A good many houses were burned in Winesboro, and also the Episcopal Church, and they were kept in constant fear. Cousin James and family lost everything by fire in Columbia. They had to spend one night in the woods with Nana's baby, only 10 days old. How much some people have suffered! We have every cause to be thankful, for we have suffered very little in comparison to others. We also heard today of several battles in which we had been victorious, that France had recognized the Confederacy, and the United States had declared war against Mexico, if it could only be true. We cannot help feeling hopeful now. Dr. Waring mentioned that a few Yankees had landed, but had gone back to their gunboats, so the Aiken cavalcade is to go off in the morning. March 23rd. The clubhouse came down with a crash this evening, or rather the frame, for the Yankees had nearly stripped it of boards, and the negroes finished it. March 24th. The caravan started for Aiken today. The negroes are behaving a great deal better now on most of the plantations. They have commenced working again, and most of them that went to town have come back, which I think will have a very good effect on the others. Our scouts have done a great deal of good in making the negroes afraid to go out. March 25th. Harbin House was burned yesterday, about 2 o'clock, by accident, we hear. We have heard no particulars, or what has become of the family. Mr. Myers, the overseer, returned home today to join the scouts. He reports that Sherman has been defeated in North Carolina, and 4,000 prisoners taken. He was perfectly surprised to see the state of things here, so different from what they are on the river. We feel very anxious about Henry, for Mr. Myers left him a week ago in Chester, quite sick. He was in a cotton house, as he could not get private lodgings. We saw a Charleston courier of 21st of March. The Yankees claim the victories of all the battles that have been fought lately, and say the rebels are nearly done up. That remains to be proved. March 26th. This day will long be remembered by the people of Pineville. The Regulators had just returned from Mount Pleasant with a supply of arms and ammunition. Last night they sent to several of the gentlemen and told them they would hang them the next day, but our scouts surprised them this morning, and 27 were killed, 11 right off, and the others in the course of the day. One man was taken who told where their ammunition was hidden, and then he was dispatched. Several made their escape in the woods, but the ringleaders were killed. 15 were killed from Captain Gurdon's place. Our force was 56 men. That of the negroes was not known, though supposed to be less. We heard that Colonel Ferguson is on his way with 1,500 men, and Major Jenkins with 6 companies. They will soon put things straight again. March 30th. Mr. Stevens arrived today. He does not appear to think anything of the behavior of his flock, but I know he must feel mortified and disappointed. He will remain and preach for us as long as it is safe for him to do so. Today has been a regular mail day. Mr. Stevens brought letters from Nina, Mrs. Sams, and Auntie, one from Uncle Charlie Snowden saying he had taken possession of our farm, and also mentioning that some of Wheeler's men had broken into the house, taken all of the carpets, blankets, and provisions. This evening Henny received a long note from Cousin Mary Ann Porcher. She mentioned that Hardee had been repulsed, but that after that Johnston had defeated Sherman, taking 4,000 prisoners. Press Smith was wounded in both legs, and his brother Porcher in the head. Both were doing well. Ravenel Macbeth was wounded and a prisoner. We have heard nothing of our other friends. Cousin Mary Ann says she heard from negroes that the entire Barker family had taken the oath of allegiance and were preparing to go to the city. We cannot blame them, for we do not know how they were situated. Dr. Mott had refused the oath up here, but was carried to Charleston, and there he was made to take it. Mr. Holmes refused to take it, and is now a prisoner. I do not know how true all this is, but we must take it for what it is worth. I am very thankful that Pa has gotten away, and that we do not live on Cooper River. March 31st. The Northampton people paid a visit here today. Willie Jervey is at home for a short time. We heard a report today that Charleston was blockaded by 50 French vessels, and that the Yankees were preparing to evacuate the place. It came from a man about here who had gone down to the gunboat to take the oath of allegiance. April 1st. The negro's freedom was brought to a close today. During the morning, a party of our scouts rode up and asked if Grandpa wished them to do anything for him. Grandpa told them that one of his negroes had been seen with a gun, but had said that it belonged to one of Uncle Rennie's men who had gone to town, so the scouts went off. We were very uneasy when we saw them coming, fearing that they might be Yankees. After dinner time, another party came up, Edward Dennis, Mr. Becturius, and several others. They requested the negroes be called up, and told them they were not free, but slaves, and would be until they died, that the Yankees had no right to free them, and that they were to go to work as they had always done, with a driver; that they would be here every 2 or 3 days to see that they worked, and the first one caught out without a ticket would be killed. Then they demanded guns from 2 of them, and said they were to be forthcoming. Poor deluded creatures! Their friends, the Yankees, have done them more harm than good. This day month their freedom was proclaimed. One report today is that the white Union soldiers in Savannah united with the citizens and massacred 4,000 blacks on account of their outrageous behavior. Another is that the gunboats have left the Santee, and the one on Cooper River has gone lower down. About dark, after we had shut up the house, we heard a loud rap at the front door, and much to our surprise it proved to be your father, Mr. Hayward. He had come all the way from Aiken on horseback to carry Aunt Bet back. April 2nd. We have been permitted the privilege of again meeting at church to offer our thanks to God for His manifold mercies to us during this terrible time. Nearly every one in the parish succeeded in getting there, mules supplying the places of all horses that had been taken. It was very pleasant to meet our friends, whom we had not seen for 6 weeks. April 4th. Aunt Bet started today for Aiken with a carriage, 2 wagons, 1 cart, 1 donkey cart, 2 cows, and an outrider. Quite a cavalcade. We heard today that 2 of the ringleaders from Pineville went to the gunboat and told how they had been treated, whereupon the officers had them put in irons and sent to Charleston, and told them if they had only known it, they would have sent a company to help the white men. We received numerous letters from Aiken this morning by the return wagons. I am sorry to say that Wheeler's men have done us more damage than the Yankees. I did not mind it at first when I thought they had only taken things they needed, but I do blame them very much for their wanton destruction of property that they ought to protect. It is a shame, and they ought to be exposed. April 6th. The scouts were here again today under Lieutenant Pettus. Charlie Snowden has joined them. Henny got them to go to Wampee and send our maid Annette home. April 8th. We have had another visit today from the Yankees. Before breakfast we saw smoke in the direction of Somerset, and the negroes told us they had heard a drum and fife in the night. We thought it was imagination, until a servant from Wantoot told us that the Yankees had burnt Somerset House and were coming on. Soon after we saw them coming through the field, and in a very short time the house was full of black Yankees. I remained in the hall to see what they would take there, and to keep a watch on our room door. The first one that came into the room asked for firearms. I told him they had all been taken. The next one asked for silver. I had no idea of showing him, so told him I was not the lady of the house. He made no reply, but went on looking. A number then came in, and the silver was soon found and carried off. 40 small pieces of table silver and soup ladle. These and 1 candlestick were the only things taken from the hall. Grandpa lost all of his clothes that he had out. A box was broken open, some sheets and tablecloths were taken, the rest flung over the floor, interspersed with broken eggs. The safe door was broken open and the ham taken. Several other rooms were entered and things taken. But I am thankful to say our room was left untouched. All of the horses were taken. General Hartwell took good care not to come up until the darkies had left. He told his captain to go and see if he could get the silver and 1 horse back, which of course we knew he did not mean him to do. The object of their visit was to catch the scouts. They said we had brought all of this on ourselves for encouraging the scouts. Uncle Rennie and Uncle William have both been taken prisoners, and we hear are to be carried to Charleston. They took the latter to get information from him, so they say, but we think they took him because he had entertained the scouts. Uncle Rennie had to put himself under the protection of the general, as there was a conspiracy detected among the black troops to come back that night and kill him. The Yankees went to Mexico this evening, and I suppose will visit all the places up there. April 10th. Of course, there was no service yesterday. Dr. Waring paid a visit and told us that Mr. Stevens was still in the parish, but keeping close. This morning several of the negro men came to Grandpa and asked to be allowed to stay here and work. They would do anything he told them. The Yankees told them to go with them, but they said they did not want to go. 2 of the boys from here have joined the U.S. Army. April 11th. Cousin Mirzak Porcher has been taken prisoner. Mexico House and all the outbuildings have been burned. Last accounts of the enemy, they were at Eutaw Springs. April 12th. Uncle Rennie and Uncle William returned home today. We were too thankful to hear of their release. They were carried as far as Eutaw and then told to go home. Woodlawn, April 14th. Uncle Rennie drove Sister home, and I came back here to take her place. Uncle Rennie and Uncle William had a most dreadful experience on the ride from Pineville to Mexico with the army. At one time they were guarded by only one black soldier, and they could hear others all around trying to bribe their guard to give them up to be killed. But the guard, though a darky, was above bribing. Pooshie, April 20th. I returned here today quite unexpectedly. Pa came down last night and went over for me. We are to leave on Monday. We hear the most exaggerated accounts of things here. Today's reports are that Lee's army, 32,000, has surrendered to Grant, and all the men paroled not to fight again during the war. The other report is that Sumterville and Somerton have both been burnt to the ground. Of course, we do not believe either of them. April 21st. We hear today that there has been a fight on the river, and 2 regiments of blacks under Potter completely cut up. April 22nd. Today's news is very cheering. It is that Lincoln and Seward have both been assassinated, and that there is to be an armistice. Here the diary letter ends without signature.
Take a moment to consider Charlotte's story. What insights into civilian resilience and adaptation might her entries reveal during the Confederacy's final days? And then, how do personal journals like hers expand our understanding beyond broader historical narratives? Both authors reveal how women endured war's chaos through escape, perseverance, and chronicling their experiences. Cora and Charlotte offer different perspectives. Their experiences highlight how geography, politics, and family allegiance shaped women's wartime lives. Most Civil War histories center on battles and generals, but in this book, the women show us the home front. What it would have been like during the Civil War. Flight, hunger, uncertainty, loss, and survival. Both women emphasize family, responsibility, and resilience, reminding us how the Civil War expanded women's roles in times of crisis. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation of Civil War, Women, North and South, a LibriVox recording, and we hope you'll subscribe to Words of the Past for more inspiring stories.